Hello, Tanse, Etlanete, Ani, bonjour. Welcome back to our shared politics. My name is Nova. I am a settler on Turtle Island. I created this podcast with the hope of highlighting our similarities amongst political parties instead of focusing on our differences and pushing people further apart. I wish to express acknowledgement that I am on Treaty 8 territory, home to the Tetsikane, Deneza, Nahiawak, Saulteaux, and BC Métis. It is essential I recognize all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, both status and non-status, as the guardians of these lands. As a non-Indigenous person, I play a role as a treaty partner being represented by the government. My pronouns are she, her, but I also accept they, them, and I fall under the 2S LGBTQIA+ umbrella. So last week we went over the Liberal Party of Canada and their very brief history from Confederation until present. It wasn't nearly as rocky as either the NDP or the Conservative history, so we were able to get through it pretty quickly. This week we're going over Canada's other options, the Green Party and the Bloc Quebecois, and then I will briefly review the People's Party of Canada. I'm going to change it up this time and go over the party platforms as well as their histories. I don't personally see the PPC as a viable option in Canada, and they haven't even held a single seat in the House of Commons since before the 2021 election, but they did hold a seat in the 2019 election, so I figured I would include them in here too. And please keep in mind, I say these 5 or I guess 6, including the PPC, political parties are Canada's options, in air quotes, because they are the only political parties to have had even one single MP in the House of Commons in Canada's history. There are many other political parties, but these are the ones that everyone knows and will probably hear about from time to time in the media, so that's just where I focused my attention to. I'll stop rambling now and we can jump in, as this is probably going to be the longest episode to date. The Green Party of Canada was founded in 1983 with a focus on green politics, also known as eco-politics. A few years prior, in 1979, a British immigrant named Trevor Hancock, who was looking for an ecological political party, of which the like had begun proliferating across Europe already by the 1970s, he published an article entitled Tomorrow's Political Party, and, quote, before long, Hancock found himself with the phone numbers of dozens of Canadians interested in advancing environmentalism through politics, and as such, the Federal Green Party started, with a paper and a journal and an address book full of phone numbers, end quote. In June 1983, the Green Party of Canada was registered, and immediately afterwards, Betty Nickerson was able to run as a Green Party candidate in a by-election in BC. The party had not gained official status at that point yet, so the party name could not appear alongside hers on the ballot. But in the fall that year, the first convention of the Canadian Greens was held in Ontario, and Trevor Hancock was the first party leader. Close to 200 people from 55 communities attended the event, coming from every province except Newfoundland and Labrador and Prince Edward Island. The creation process of the party was difficult, with deep divides amongst those who argued for national structure and those in favor of a bioregional democracy structure, wherein political, economic, and cultural systems are organized sustainably around naturally defined areas called bioregions. So think like Arctic versus prairies versus Atlantic, and the different needs that come from those different regions. The party members decided on a radically decentralized party structure, and for years a kind of green anarchism reigned. Eventually, an agreement was reached for a union between the regions, building upwards from the bottom. The question then arose, is the priority to redefine politics from the ground up, or to play the electoral game according to the present rules? In the 1984 federal election, the Green Party ran 60 candidates, and approximately 27,000 Canadians, or 0.2% of the population, voted Green. However, by the mid-1980s, there was a near collapse of the party, and it was only survived, although not particularly active, by the BC Greens. In the 1988 election, the Canadian Greens decided to concentrate on Quebec, where Le Parti Vert, Quebec's Green Party, ran 29 candidates, up from just 4 in the last election. The party had relatively great success in the province, polling around 2.4% of the vote, and Les Verts went on to host the 1990 Canadian Greens Conference in Montreal. Unfortunately for the party, though, the question of Quebec sovereignty would interfere not long after, and many Quebecois candidates soon abandoned the Greens in favor of the Bloc Quebecois. By the 1993 election, there were only 6 Green candidates left in Quebec. At the same time as the Parti Vert began to collapse due to the leader's defection to the Bloc Quebecois, the Green Party of Canada in Quebec, their leader, who had, if you hadn't been able to tell by their name, created a predominantly Anglophone party in Quebec, was actually removed from his position in the party due to anti-Semitic comments he made and some of his candidates had made. These events led to a complete decline in all Green Party organizations in Quebec, despite the very promising start a mere 4 years earlier. For a while, the Canadian Greens functioned essentially either as an appendage of the BC or Ontario provincial parties. It wasn't until 1997 that the Greens first conducted a national leaders tour and presented a national platform and a bilingual campaign. Joanne Rousseau, who had only been elected leader 2 months earlier, was actually trilingual, speaking Spanish, French, and English. In 1998, the party adopted a rule that forbids membership in any other federal political party to avoid the party from being taken over. In the 2000 election, the Green Party of Canada nominated 111 candidates in 9 out of 10 provinces, all but Newfoundland and Labrador, and in 1 of 3 territories, Nunavut. These candidates went on to collect 0.81% of the total popular vote. Not very impressive. Candidates were not run in Newfoundland and Labrador, as the Green candidate in question supported the seal hunt and mining, as most locals did. Which is weird, because I thought the whole beginning of the party was to realize that every ecoregion has different cultural and economic needs and practices. Seal hunting is a part of their culture, no matter how cute the pups are and how heartbreaking the PETA photos are, which they 100% are, don't get me wrong. Anyways, the Green candidate in St. John's supported seal hunting, and Joanne Rousseau refused to endorse him, resulting in that being the only province not to have a candidate nominated. Found my way back. In the 2001 Quebec City protest, Rousseau found herself incarcerated for taking a photo of the jail they were planning to put the protesters in. Rousseau promoted the Green Party as anti-globalization, anti-corporatist, and pro-peace, but when the German Greens bombed Belgrade, she felt undermined and her leadership was called into question, as some in the party had supported military intervention. By the end of 2001, she had stepped down as party leader and actually joined the NDP. In February 2003, Jim Harris won the second bid for leadership for the Green Party of Canada. Harris was elected to lead the party with over 80% of the vote and the support of the leaders of all the provincial-level Green parties. About 18 months later, a second leadership election would take place over a leadership challenge vote in August of 2004. Harris pulled through with 56% on the first bid this time, and his opponent, Tom Manley, had 30% of the vote. Manley was appointed deputy leader, but went on to leave the party to join the Liberals the next year anyways. Also in 2004, the Green Party of Canada Living Platform was created. By using wiki technology, the goal of the Living Platform was to open the party's policymaking to the general public. This made it easier to access party policy intelligence for rural and remote users and Canadians abroad. Due to this, the Canadian Greens actually became the first political party to use a wiki for such a purpose. Of course, as with all political parties, or really any organizations in general, there's always internal conflict. Some members of the party were against such a transparent approach, as they didn't appreciate public criticism and they had concerns about the party's public image as well as any liability issues. On the other hand, other members were for a completely transparent process and argued that regulation goes directly against the culture of the Greens, and argued that the solution was not to suppress the criticism, but to instead address the issues that are raised. For the 2004 election, the party increased their media coverage significantly and finished 4.3% of the popular vote. A party candidate in a Vancouver Island region riding won over 10,000 votes, becoming the first Green Party candidate to do so. However, he still finished fourth in his riding. In the 2006 election, still no candidates were elected to the House of Commons, and the party only gained 0.2% of an increase in the popular vote, bringing them to 4.5%. Their best performance was actually in Alberta, surprisingly, where it received 6.6% of the popular vote overall for the province. The party's 2006 election campaign had been disrupted by allegations made by the party's former assistant national organizer that the party leader had not filed a proper accounting of money spent during the leadership campaign 2 years earlier. This basically became a pissing match, where the party's legal counsel sent warnings to retract the allegations or face legal action, but in the end, the party leader announced he was stepping down. In August 2006, just 2 years after the last leadership election for the Green Party, Elizabeth May went on to win with 65.3% of the votes cast. Although up until that point, the Canadian Greens had never held a seat yet, under Elizabeth May, they began to receive even more mainstream media attention on other party policies not directly related to the environment, like supporting labor rights and poppy legalization in Afghanistan. After the 2008 federal election, the party had increased their share of the popular vote to 6.8%, attracting nearly 280,000 new votes. Yet the party still failed to elect a single candidate. With Liberal Party leader Stéphane Dion running on a largely environmentalist platform, and both the Greens and Liberals sharing an enemy in Stephen Harper, it was questioned if an alliance would be formed between the two. This was confirmed when Dion and May agreed not to run candidates in each other's ridings. Ultimately, this was unsuccessful, and May did not even win in her own riding. Finally, in May 2011, Elizabeth May finally won her riding and became the first elected Green Party MP to sit in the House of Commons. Actually, the riding that Elizabeth May won was the riding that had received 10,000 votes in 2004, so it makes sense that she was able to find success there almost a decade later after further campaigning. In August 2014, the president of the Green Party of Canada, Paul Estrin, published a blog post on the Green Party's website criticizing the actions of Hamas during the 2014 Israel-Gaza conflict. In his article titled "Why Gaza Makes Me Sad," he talked about Hamas's desire to obliterate the state of Israel and how the terrorist group uses children as human shields. Estrin's blog post was subsequently deleted by the party, with many party seniors and decision-makers, including Elizabeth May, distancing themselves from him, with a large majority of the party calling on him to resign. Later that same month, he resigned, criticizing the party for betraying their commitment to values of inclusivity and open public discourse. Elizabeth May accepted the resignation of Estrin, stating that he was not forced to resign, but did so of his own volition. May has said that the problem with his statements were the confusion they caused because they differed from party lines, but confirmed that Estrin was still indeed a true Green. Interesting how someone speaking out for Gaza in 2024 gets them kicked out of their party, and yet 10 years ago, you still weren't being asked to leave by your party leader. Interesting. In the 2015 election, May was re-elected and was again the only Green Party MP in the House. On March 23, 2018, May was arrested while protesting the construction of the Kinder Morgan pipeline in defiance of the injunction that allowed the construction to resume, along with an NDP MP. Both pleaded guilty and paid a fine of $1,500. In a 2019 by-election, just months before the federal election that year, a historic second Green Party MP was elected under the party's banner, again in the Vancouver Island region. Later, in the federal election, a third Green Party MP would be elected to the House, this time in New Brunswick. Nationwide, the Greens received 6.55% of the popular vote. However, just weeks after the election, Elizabeth May announced that she would be stepping down as leader of the party, but remaining leader of the parliamentary caucus, saying this decision came as a promise to her daughter. In the 2020 Green Party of Canada leadership election, 10 candidates ran to replace Elizabeth May, probably seeing as this was the first time leadership had been open since, 2004. Annamie Paul came out on top and became the first Black Canadian and first Jewish woman to be elected leader of a major political party in Canada. She went on to run in a by-election in Toronto later that year and placed second overall. So remember that candidate from New Brunswick who was the third ever Green Party MP? Well, on June 10th, 2021, she actually crossed the floor, leaving the Green Caucus entirely to join the Liberal Caucus due to internal party disagreements over the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. She criticized party leader Paul's statement on the matter following Israeli airstrikes as inadequate. This, in turn, prompted an advisor to Paul to vow to replace her with a pro-Zionist candidate. In the 2021 federal election, an MP was elected for the first time in Ontario, while at the same time, the other Vancouver Island MP lost his seat. After the election, Paul announced her intention to resign as leader. Amita Kuttner was appointed an interim leader in the meantime, becoming the youngest person to lead a federal political party, she was only 30 at the time, as well as the first transgender person and person of East Asian heritage. 1 year later, Elizabeth May was elected leader of the party once again, with promises to convert the current leadership model into a co-leadership model, with Jonathan Pedneau being her co-leader. Pedneau is currently deputy leader of the party, and that's the history of the Green Party of Canada. So now we're going to move on to the Bloc Quebecois, or the BQ. We're going to outline the party a bit here. The BQ is a Quebec nationalist group and strongly promotes and advocates for Quebec's sovereignty/independence. They are socially democratic and support the Kyoto Protocol, abortion rights, LGBTQ plus rights, legislation of assisted suicide, abolition of the Senate, abolition of the monarchy, Quebec secularism law, and exempting Quebec from the requirements of the Multiculturalism Act. From the 1993 federal election until 2001, the Bloc was the largest party in Quebec and either the second or third largest party in the House of Commons through 7 straight federal elections. So let's jump into their history. The Bloc Quebecois was formed in 1990 and first was led by Lucien Bouchard as an informal coalition of progressive conservative and liberal members of parliament from Quebec. The party was intended to be temporary and was given the goal of the promotion of sovereignty at the federal level. The party aimed to disband following a successful referendum on independence from Canada. In the 1993 federal election, the Bloc won 54 seats out of 75 in Quebec, sweeping nearly all of the Francophone ridings. Because the opposition vote in the rest of Canada was split between the Reform Party, the Progressive Conservative Party, and the New Democrat Party, the Bloc narrowly won the second largest number of seats in the House of Commons and therefore became the official opposition. While the Reform finished second in the national popular vote, the Bloc's heavy concentration of support in Quebec was slightly larger than Reform's concentration in the West. As I mentioned briefly in episode 4, soon after the 1993 election, the BQ leader announced that Blocist MPs would only speak French on the floor of the House of Commons, a policy that remains in force to this day. This was out of necessity. Although most of the Bloc's founding members were fluently bilingual in French and English, Bouchard had discovered that most of his large caucus could not speak English well enough to use it in debate. In the 1995 referendum on Quebec sovereignty, no prevailed and the Premier of Quebec stepped down the next day. Bouchard then decided to leave federal politics and took over as Premier of Quebec in the next provincial election there. Gilles Duceppe became the next BQ leader in 1997, and in the federal election that year, the party dropped to 44 seats and lost official opposition status to the Reform Party. In the 2000 election, the Bloc dropped even further to 38 seats in the House of Commons. One reason for this was because the BQ had forced mergers of several smaller municipalities into larger cities, which was very unpopular with the residents of those areas. The Liberal Quebec Party campaigned on allowing residents the option to demerge if they chose, and because of this, the Liberals went on to hold the majority of Quebec seats for the first time since 1984. From then to the subsequent election, the Bloc continued to denounce the federal government's interventions in what the Bloc saw as exclusively provincial jurisdictions. The Bloc credits its actions for the uncovering of what has since become the sponsorship scandal. So basically a one-sided beef that the Bloc had with the Liberals, even though the Bloc had fucked themselves over by doing whatever they wanted without first consulting the actual people who lived in the region, led them to believe that they somehow had a hand in uncovering the sponsorship scandal. After the 2006 election, Duceppe maintained that the Bloc would continue to cooperate with other opposition parties or with the government when it advantaged Quebec, but otherwise would not participate in a federal government. After the 2008 election, Duceppe gave a speech in front of his supporters stating, quote, "Without the Bloc Quebecois tonight, Mr. Harper would have formed a majority government," end quote. This is exactly why I laugh when I hear right-wing Canadians say that if we had a two-party system, the Conservatives would win every time. What they don't actually realize is the majority of Canada is left-leaning when you get to the nitty-gritty of things. And I say this with full confidence, seeing as how the highest popular vote that the Conservative government has ever won was in 1917 under Borden, with 56% of the popular vote. There have actually only been a handful of times throughout our 44 parliaments that the Conservatives have won 50% of the vote, and those were before the NDP came in to split the left. The only reason the left doesn't win every time is because leftist organizations have always been disorganized. There are the Libs, the NDP, the Greens, and the Bloc to split the vote between for the lefties of Canada. The right gets to amalgamate behind one giant beast. In the 2001 federal election, in the wake of a surge of support for the NDP, the Bloc received less than a quarter of the popular vote in Quebec and less than 6% of the national vote. It lost 44 of the 47 seats it held at Parliament's dissolution and only added one seat. The seats lost included that of Duceppe, who resigned as party president and leader. It also lost all but one of its seats in Montreal. By winning only 4 seats, the Bloc failed to reach the minimum of 12 seats required for official party status in the House of Commons. If you remember, MPs without official party status are treated as independents and must sit in the back row of the opposition benches. They are permitted just a few questions each week in question period and cannot sit as voting members on parliamentary committees. Basically then, between the 2011 and 2015 elections, the Bloc lost and gained multiple MPs through members crossing the floor, illness, and outright resignation from the party. By the end of 2014, the party had been reduced to only 2 seats in Parliament. During the 2015 federal election, the Bloc Quebecois had hoped to pick up seats from the collapsing NDP vote. However, most Quebecois actually instead switched their allegiance to either the Liberals or the Conservatives rather than back to the Bloc. While the Bloc managed to win 10 seats, more than twice that of the previous election, it was still not enough to regain that official party status. The party's share of the popular vote in Quebec fell to 19%, its lowest point up until that time. As in 2011, Giuseppe failed to win his own seat and resigned again as party leader. In March 2017, a new leader was elected for the party, Martine Ouellet, who was not a member of parliament at the time. However, by March 2018, 7 of the Bloc's 10 MPs quit the party's caucus to form a different group, citing conflicts with Ouellet's leadership style and her insistence that the Bloc should emphasize promoting Quebec independence over defending Quebec's interests. Only 3 MPs remained in the Bloc's caucus. More than 20 ex-Bloc MPs, including Gilles Giuseppe, issued an open letter for supporting the 7 current MPs who had resigned from caucus and demanding Ouellet's resignation. A leadership review referendum was held on Ouellet's leadership in early June 2018, resulting in the party's membership rejecting her leadership by 67%, while a proposal that the party prioritize Quebec independence on a daily basis above all other issues also passed with 65% support. Ouellet subsequently announced her resignation as party leader effective the next week. As the only candidate to have entered the leadership race, Yves-François Blanchet was named leader in January 2019. Since Blanchet became leader, the BQ has seen their support increasing in Quebec during the 2019 federal election, which some considered to have exceeded expectations. The BQ increased its number of seats from 10 in 2015 to 32 in 2019, both overtaking the NDP to become the 3rd largest party in Canada and regaining official party status finally. In the 2021 Canadian federal election, the BQ, led by Blanchet, won 32 seats, unchanged from the prior election. The Bloc Quebecois held a leadership confidence vote in May 2023, where Blanchet won 97% of the vote. And that basically wraps up the Bloc Quebecois. Okay, so on to the People's Party of Canada, which should not take long at all, as the party was only formed in September of 2018. Shortly after the party leader, Maxime Bernier, also known as the Albertan from Quebec by his colleagues in Ottawa, resigned from the Conservatives, basically because Andrew Scheer's Conservatives weren't far enough right for him. The only thing I've got nice to say about the PPC is that at least they're against corporate welfare. However, they're also against immigration to Canada, and they seek to reduce the number of entrants per year. They want to scrap the Canadian Multiculturalism Act, which seeks to preserve cultural diversity. They would like to withdraw from the Paris Climate Accords, which were only signed in 2015. And in 2021, of course, they ran on the campaign of being against COVID-19 lockdowns and restrictions, vaccine passports, and compulsory vaccinations. Now let's head back a few years to 2018 and see where this party came from. The People's Party of Canada, which I also just hate that they've co-opted this People's Party of Canada. You're not my party. Don't call yourself the People's Party of Canada when you're a right-wing party. You're not a People's Party. So the People's Party of Canada was formed a few weeks after the resignation of Maxime Bernier from the Conservative Party of Canada. In his resignation speech, Bernier stated that he was leaving because, quote, "I've come to realize this party is too intellectually and morally corrupt to be reformed," end quote. Bernier also stated that under opposition leader Andrew Scheer, the Conservative Party had abandoned its principles on issues including political correctness, corporate welfare, equalization payment reform, and agricultural supply management. Don't know why the agricultural thing came in. However, I think he was just a little bit salty towards Scheer, as Bernier had lost the Conservative leadership election to Scheer a year earlier. Bernier was accused by prominent Conservative politicians such as former Prime Minister Stephen Harper and Brian Mulroney of trying to divide the political right. This is exactly what I was talking about with the left being split. If there's one thing the right wing always gets right, it's not dividing their group for better or worse, regardless of the maniacs who may also find themselves part of your group. Speaking of maniacs, on November 1st, 2018, the party revealed that it had over 30,000 founding members, and news outlets later revealed that one of the PPC's founding members was a former American white nationalist, and that two others had ties to anti-immigration groups. The former white nationalist was removed from the party a year after his past came to light. A spokesperson for the party stated that his past didn't come up during the vetting process since he came from the US. The two other members denied having racist views, and the party later told media that they did not have enough resources to vet them at the beginning of the PPC's formation. Yeah, because that's like a good excuse for why a founding member of your party is an American white nationalist. These guys aren't usually quiet about it. A simple Facebook search probably would have sufficed. The party received eligibility status on Remembrance Day 2018. And in mid-August of 2019, the party held their first convention, where roughly 500 party officials took part in door-knocking workshops, traditional media and social media training, debate training, and mock debates. The party has undergone several controversies, if that's surprising. In April 2019, a party executive resigned, stating the party was an utter free-for-all and had been hijacked by egomaniacs. He was one of the earliest individuals to blow the whistle on internal racism within the party. More resignations followed and echoed accusations that the party had been infiltrated by racist, xenophobic, homophobic, and downright hateful people. In July 2019, the entire People's Party of Canada board in a Manitoban riding publicly sent a resignation letter claiming that racists, anti-Semites, and conspiracy theorists had taken over and were promoting the closure of Canada's physical and economic borders and had spread misinformation through personal and official channels. They cited disillusionment towards the party's increasingly xenophobic nature and lack of focus towards economic discussion as their core reasons for resigning. A candidate in a different Manitoban riding rejected the accusation, claiming the action is rooted in vindictiveness against Bernier. The manager of the first riding's Facebook page responded to the criticism by stating, quote, "Our problem is not necessarily with Max Bernier himself, but the entire organization has deep-rooted problems," end quote. The Winnipeg South Centre riding argued that it was normal for a party to have people with crazy ideas and racists, and wanted to know how the party reacted to it. The staunch PPC candidate disputed their statement, stating that they'd be kicked out pretty fast if they'd held such viewpoints, and touted the diversity of the PPC's candidates and claimed that some elements of the NDP and the Green Party have anti-Semitic viewpoints and that there was an anti-Quebec vibe in online forums from people supporting Conservative Party leader Andrew Scheer. So basically he's just going to point fingers. The PPC later told Global News that the removal of the white nationalist was a prime example of the party taking a stand against racism by doing the bare minimum. In the 2019 election, a few months later, Bernier lost his own election to a Conservative, and no People's Party candidates were elected. Weird. Bernier had managed to win 28.4% of the vote in his riding, and no other PPC won more than 4% of any vote. And nationwide, the party received about 1.6% of the popular vote overall. In 2021, the party announced it would run under the same platform they used in 2019, but added in some anti-vax rhetoric while they were at it. I think this is what caused them to get around 5% of the popular vote this time, and they actually surpassed the Green Party in terms of vote shares, but the PPC, again, did not see a single candidate elected, and Bernier had lost again in his own riding. During the 2022 Freedom Convoy, the PPC organized a rally in Waterloo, Ontario in support of the call to end COVID-19 mandates, and Bernier accused the federal and provincial governments of violating human rights and also accused Justin Trudeau of colluding with Joe Biden on vaccine mandates. And honestly, I think that's the perfect way to sum up what this party stands for and who their supporters are. In May 2023, Bernier announced he would run for MP in Manitoba and lost again to a Conservative. Since then, I haven't really heard much about Bernier or the PPC in general, and fingers crossed we won't hear about them ever again on a federal level. So that's the story of the PPC. They had a quick rise, not very climactic though, and a quick fall. And I think that just goes to show it's kind of the same as the Reform Party. The Reform Party was actually able to get into opposition at one point, but that was also a perfect storm of people being tired of the Liberals and the Conservatives having split up. And yeah. As always, thank you for joining me today. I drop a new episode every Monday morning at midnight, so check back in next week to see what I'll be sharing with you then. I'm interested to find out too, because I have no idea what I'm going to start researching yet. If you learned something new today, it'd be awesome if you'd click that button and follow along for next time. Or if you'd like to contact me with feedback, you can email me at oursharedpodcast@gmail.com. See you soon, raccoon.